Hi, and welcome to another edition of Strategic Business Insights. Today we're going to talk about living exponentially, right? An exponential life path as opposed to a linear life path, right? Now just to break it down, right, the basic mathematics, what is the difference between linear and exponential? Well, linear is 2, 4, 6, 8, right? Adding 2 every time in that particular example. That's a linear equation. If you plotted that on a graph, it's a straight line, right? By comparison, an exponential one would be 2, 4, 8, 16. In that case, you're doubling every time. 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16. If you plotted that on a graph, it's going to look more like this, okay? It's going to have a curved line. It's going to have an exponential curve. And what I'm trying to encourage you to do in this video is just a simple mind shift. Because here's the thing. As human beings, we are hardwired to think in linear terms, right? It's actually, if you take an exponential pattern far enough out, it becomes difficult to comprehend mentally. You just can't get your head around it. Because if you continue doubling, right, if you continue doubling 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1,024, it starts to get so huge. 2,048, 4,000. It gets really crazy very, very quickly. Meanwhile, the linear 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, you can get your head around it. It makes more sense. Well, you have a life, right? And you were born on one date, right? And you're going to die on a different date, right? Just to be very harsh about it. And right now we're in between those two dates. So what are you going to do from here until the end? Right here, you're right here now, you're going to live for however long you're going to live, and none of us know the answer to that question. But what are you going to do from today forward? And I encourage you to try and live exponentially. And what does that require? Whether it's individually as a person, as an individual person, or maybe you run a business. Maybe you're in business, or maybe both, right? Like for example, myself, I'm in business and I'm an individual, of course. But think exponentially, which means to leverage everything. Every time you make another step, find a way. Think to yourself, now that I've got that under my belt, how can I play a bigger game based on this larger foundation? You know, people consistently, listen to this, people consistently overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in a decade, right? It's the same concept. We are in an instant gratification society. So a lot of times people overestimate. They're like, oh my gosh, I can do so many things in a year. Turns out a year goes by pretty quickly. And a lot of times we don't measure up to some of our lofty goals that we have for 1 year, especially those of us who are ambitious. I'm ambitious myself, so I have these big goals, and sometimes achieving the ones just 1 year away are difficult. But the thing is, at the end of the year, I have accomplished more. Like in my case, I've spoken in more cities, I have more contacts, I have more videos on my website. Not only these types of videos that I'm recording here in my studio, but also videos of me speaking at some event somewhere. And so because of that increased foundation, right, I've built a foundation that's now larger than it was 1 year ago. And so because of that, the steps that I can take next year are bigger than the steps that I could take this year, right? Now, again, we can get our head around that. That's only 2 years. It's only 2 iterations of this exponential curve. But then what about in year 3? Right? In the 1 year, I built my foundation, but in the second year, I could take this big leap forward because of what I did this year. And then in the third year, I can take a huge leap because of the progress I would have made in the first 2 years would allow things to happen in year 3 that would never have been possible in year 1. Right? Do you understand? And so then the fourth year, there are options on the table that I never would have dreamt of in year 1. Right? And year 5, it gets even crazier. In year 6, in year 7. And I've noticed this in my own career. Now look, at the end of the day, I am still living a linear existence in a lot of respects. And primarily because I'm trading time for money. Right? I'm a speaker. I earn like 90% of my income is speaking fees. So that's what I do. That's all I do is I go to events and I give keynote speeches. And so there's only so many events that I can do in a given year, especially if you're traveling. A lot of what I do is international, so it takes time. There's a limit to how many events you can do in a year. Probably that number is around 40 or 50. Especially if you're doing a lot of international work, after 40 or 50, I mean, you're really, really busy. So at the end of the day, I am trading time for money. So I need to find ways to leverage what I've done as well. So maybe there's programs that I could sell passively somehow. Like there are a lot of people, like for example, a lot of other speakers that are selling things. I don't really have any programs that I sell, or very few at this stage, but there's a lot of other speakers that have these sorts of programs, and so they can leverage, right? They can leapfrog up, because while they're doing what they're doing, they can have a program perhaps online that's selling passively while they're not indirectly involved. So that's leverage that I have not taken advantage of myself. So now I notice it because maybe the speaking fees get better, or the organizations that I have an opportunity to work with are increasingly large organizations. But the bottom line is, what's your situation, right? What do you do? How can you leverage that and fortify what you've done so far, so that what you do next year is something that you couldn't have done this year? You can only do it next year because you've created this foundation. And then what you do next year, you've got to incorporate that into that foundation, so that the following year you can do even larger things that were only possible because of what you've built, that foundation. So always be thinking about building a foundation so that you can leverage that foundation, right? That's inevitably what living exponentially is about, is add, here's a great way to put it, add permanence to everything you do. Everything you do, make part of it permanent, right? Like when I speak for a large corporation, I just did a couple of events for Marriott. It's a big company. So I put Marriott onto my website. Their logo is there, right? My biggest client is Bloomberg TV, so their logo is there, right? And I've had some media exposure over the years, and I add those logos. What am I doing? I'm adding permanence to what I've done. So how can you add permanence to what you do, right? Think back last year. What are the big accomplishments that you did last year? How can you add permanence and show that you did those things, maybe on your website or your promotional material, or somehow in how you communicate to your prospects or customers or even friendships? How do you incorporate those things so that you become a larger person? You're building that foundation by adding permanence to everything you do. That way, what happens over a period of years can be astonishing, because come year 6, year 7, year 8, year 10, year 12, you're leapfrogging, you're taking such large steps because you've added so much permanence that things become possible that you never would have dreamt of in the first year. So this is a perfect video that matches my kind of primary message as a speaker. And I thank you so much for watching these videos. But the message is to think bigger about your business. Think bigger about your life.